Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Hello. And welcome to Baker Center Theater this evening. My name is Teresa Moran, and I'm the director of the Food Studies theme here at Ohio University. And it is a great honor for us to have here with us Gary Paul Nabhan. And before I turn it over to Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Bob Frank, to introduce our speaker, I'd first like to take a moment to thank all the sponsors who made it possible for Gary to be here with us today. First, bringing Gary to Athens was a joint partnership with the Ohio Pawpaw Festival, so all hail to the pawpaw. Thanks as well goes to the Bodhi Tree Guest House for providing accommodations for our speaker. And the OU sponsors of Gary's visit are the Food Studies, Sustainability, Ohio Sense of Place, and Knowing the Future themes, the Common Experience Project on Sustainability, and Environmental Studies at the Voinovich School. And Dean Frank has a question. He'd like to know how many people are here because of themes. Okay. Thank you. Yes, faculty can raise their hands too, you know. And following Gary's talk, please join us outside the theater for book signing and a reception. Also, please visit the Food Matters Student Club table. And also, we have here the Southeast Ohio Seed Savers Informational Tent. Everyone should have received one of these, so please stop by and find out about the exciting new work in seed saving. And now I'd like to turn it over to Bob Frank, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Teresa. Gary Nabhan is here today to discuss new crops from wild fruits, re-diversifying cropping systems. So it's a challenge to summarize all of the things that he's done, but I'm going to make some attempt to do this. In his book, Where Our Food Comes From, Dr. Nabhan notes that a great Russian botanist, Nikolai Vavilov, was conversant in genetics, ecology, evolution, linguistics, and geography. And Vavilov not only had to be bright and well-mentored, but also driven by an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. And these same words can be used to describe Gary Nabhan himself. He's an internationally recognized writer of over 30 books. He's been honored with a MacArthur Genius Award, Lannan Literary Fellowship, Southwest Book Award, John Burroughs Medal for Nature Writing, and several honorary degrees and Lifetime Achievement Awards. He currently holds the W.K. Kellogg Endowed Chair on Sustainable Food Systems at the University of Arizona. That's the Kellogg? Is that of the famous Kellogg? It's kind of interesting. Yeah. He's a food activist engaged in food justice and farming alliances, and a proponent of conserving the links between bio and cultural diversity. For example, he's the founder of Renewing America's Food Traditions, or RAFT, an alliance of food, farming, conservation, and culinary advocates. He's played a role in establishing Ironwood Forest National Monument, community-based seed banks, land reserves for conserving wild crops, and habitats for migratory pollinators. And Gary was among the earliest researchers to promote the use of native foods for preventing diabetes. In addition to all that, he's a farmer, he's an orchard keeper, and a wild food forager from his small farm, which is near the Mexican border, which, as you might imagine, in and of itself is an adventure, as he was sharing with us. He's an ecumenical Franciscan brother and has helped the Franciscan Action Network shape ethical responses to environmental injustice and to migration and climate change issues. And as revealed in his book, which is also outside, Cumin, Camels, and Caravans, he's quite an eclectic chef and with familiarity with a wide range of cuisines.
Is that on? Nope. There we go. There we go. Oh, good Lord, that scared the daylights out of me. How many people wanted to run out the back door for that one? Boy, I haven't heard anything like that since I saw Jimi Hendrix in 1968, you know. Speaking of 1968, I want to dedicate this talk to my high school friend Roberta, who went to high school with me before I dropped out of high school in Gary, Indiana, over 45 years ago. I haven't seen her in that long, and it's just a godsend to see an old friend and meet her husband and find that we share interests and get to be reunited. Her daughter went here to school, so those of you who are students, people do survive after they come out of school here. She says her daughter's gainfully employed and in her course of study, she's not flipping hamburgers someplace. So you have a future ahead of you. And I want to thank all the hostesses and hosts of the last few days, including Teresa and the Pawpaw Festival and the many students and faculty who met with me so that I could learn all the great things going on here. So you have a great community, and I'm grateful to get just a little tiny glimpse into it. So let me start this, and how do I put it up on the screen? Oh, Lord. Let's try the escape button. Oh, no, I don't know how to do the most important thing. Let's see, slideshow from the beginning, maybe something like that. That always sounds so good, from the beginning, you know. So in concert with the Food for Thought theme, I want to sort of bring together some of the biological and social aspects of re-diversifying our diet. And because we've just had this great Pawpaw Festival this last weekend where the first 5 or 6 faculty I met were all holding pawpaw-flavored home brews. I thought, what a neat way to meet a faculty. And I thought, well, let's talk about wild fruits, because pawpaw is sort of the iconic wild fruit that's become a cultural icon to one region of the United States. And I'm particularly interested in how we take some of the 4,000 wild edible foods of this continent and turn them into crops that can help us with a more resilient agriculture in the face of climate change. Some of these are so well adapted to the soils and the climate variability that we've experienced so far. Obviously, we're going to see climatic events that are unlike anything we've seen in the past, but it seems that there's more variability in these wild plants that we can draw on than in some of our crops. So how can we put that to use for the agriculture and the food security of the future? And these are some examples. The lower ones are fruits you probably never heard of that we get down in where I live, which I fondly call the stinking hot desert of the Southwest. And then a whole variety of wild and cultivated apples and other fruits that are found in abandoned or feral orchards. Feral is a word for something that was once cultivated that then sort of survived in the wild after that, and we'll be talking about those. And then that's one of my wild friends, a student that I met at the Slow Food University in Italy that got to see pictures of all these wonderful fruits from North America and said, is there any way that I could come back to school and work on that? So that's my dear friend who's kind of like an adopted stepdaughter, Deja Walker, who some of you know here. And she's been making delicious things with all those wild fruits. She's a pastry chef. So the question before you today, and before us, I guess, is something that we were talking about at the Pawpaw Festival. How can communities take their unique resources, whether they're fruits or anything else, and build a more resilient food system and more localized economy with them. And I think to do that, you need to have something that's special to this place, that is part of the sense of place of what you have here, like the Pawpaw Festival celebrates. And it also means that if you do that right, you may have a niche market that a multinational company that's sending food all around the world, treating grain as a commodity to borrow and trade and sell, whether they've ever touched the grains or not. Those people are kind of left in the dust when something like your shagbark seed and mill has something so unique that it can't be replicated. So the whole idea is, how do we build our local food system and economy on something that you uniquely have that no one else can take away? And communities like yours aren't the only ones asking this question. And I'm going to give examples from 2 or 3 different regions in the United States who are pondering over those same questions. Other people who live just south of you, all in hill country here, but part of this entire Appalachian corridor that goes down to Georgia. And I think you'll see that those of you who feel connected to Appalachia in the broad sense have something very unique for the entire continent here. I'll also give some examples from what I'm calling Salmon Nation, the Pacific Northwest, and from the Stinking Hot Desert, which we sometimes call Chili Pepper Nation, down where I live. And so I just want to say that there's many local organizations like oh my gosh, there's Community Food Initiative. I did get it on there. But the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, Midwest Organic Farmers, a lot of groups have had discussions about these kind of resources over the years. So this is kind of like the Cliff's Notes nutshell. All the students who are assigned to come to this lecture, because you have to write some notes on it, this is the only thing you have to write down for the whole talk, and then you can slide through the rest and have fun. But there's sort of 6 stages of bringing a forgotten fruit to recovery. And the first is going out into the landscape and rescuing what's still there. I mean, something like the pawpaw, for every pawpaw patch we still have, probably there's dozens that are now under shopping malls or under industrial sites or flooded out or whatever. So some of the places, I don't know if you know it, but pawpaw is probably the word, or the fruit, with the most place names for it of any fruit in North America. If you think about oaks or pines or mesquite, the iconic tree down where we live, pawpaw outdistances those in having so many place names in the American landscape named for it. And that shows another way that people connect their foods to their sense of place. Anyway, so we start looking for the plants again and see the variation that's held within the remnant populations, and we begin to evaluate that diversity. Which are the big pawpaws? Which taste best? Which ripen slowly and don't spoil easily? Which can be transported without bruising? Then, just as important as what we might call the plant genetics or plant diversity is the human diversity associated with it. What oral histories are there still about the best pawpaws in this county, where you can find them, how you can best use them? And there was a wonderful tasting contest yesterday that I kind of drooled over because people had come up with so many fantastic ways of using pawpaws in both desserts and in main dishes. Then you do the kind of thing that the Pawpaw Foundation and Kentucky State University and the Ohio pawpaw growers are doing, which are taking the best wild fruits and selecting them and starting to grow those varieties that have particularly good traits. And it's not just doing this for pawpaw, but many other fruits, as I'll explain later. But the most interesting thing for me is that we're coming on the 100th anniversary of the first time the American public was invited to do that kind of evaluation and selection of pawpaws. And it literally involved over 20,000 people in 1915 through 1917 who were encouraged by a kind of stuffy scientific journal of the time, Journal of Heredity, that was mostly about breeding chickens and breeding fruits. And they invited the American public to send the best pawpaws from their area into the journal, and then 4 or 5 of the most well-known celebrity plant explorers of the time, David Fairchild and Luther Burbank and several other people who knew pawpaws well, tasted them and decided that 28 were worth selecting for agriculture. So we're thinking of redoing that this next year with the Pawpaw Festival and a couple universities and the Pawpaw Foundation to see if we can use social media to help document where the pawpaws come from, what traits they have, what their environmental tolerances are, and which taste the best. So we're planning to redo that on a centennial anniversary. And then there's doing something that, again, the 20-some years of the Pawpaw Festival has done really well, and that's introducing newcomers to the taste of pawpaws. And we do this all the time. We've had a chili pepper festival in southern Arizona where I live, and I became the wild chili eating champion of the universe or something like that. I couldn't talk or eat anything for the 5 days after that, but it was fun for a moment. And so some of these things become sort of cultural icons of the region that you live in. And then we find new niches for the cropping systems, the cuisines, and the markets. So one of the most interesting things for me was seeing how pawpaws were used in sauces and desserts that weren't even imaginable 100 years ago. There were some really innovative things. So it's not just keeping a tradition, locking it in place like it's a museum piece, but it's all this innovation that goes on as people take pawpaws or other fruits and apply them to new uses. And then finally, something that your community is doing so well here is rebuilding the infrastructure to celebrate the foods grown in this county and wild foraged and do something with them. As far as I know, there's only ever been one pawpaw canning operation, and that was in southern Indiana, and I think it went under in the 60s. But they were trying to nationally distribute pawpaws until I think some of the Indiana neighbors, the Hoosiers, said, hey, save those for us. We like them more than those people in Washington or Oregon might ever like them. They like their berries over there. Save all the pawpaws for us. So it ended up that the community wanted to keep the pawpaws in their own area. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of the talk. Now all of you can go to sleep. So another part of this is deepening what we mean by local. There's a lot of talk about local food systems and being a locavore, and even after writing a book on trying to eat within a 250-mile range of where I lived that I wrote 15 years ago, I don't think my diet is more than 60 or 70% foods from my county and ecological region, and I don't necessarily want it to be. I'm not trying to play a numbers game about that. What I'm really trying to do by sourcing things locally is know the producers and support them in their agriculture and in their economic activities, keeping that multiplier effect in our community, what one of my friends calls sticky money, because it sticks inside your community and is recycled and multiplied, rather than seeing it run away off to New York City or Hong Kong or whatever evil empire you want to talk about. No, they're not evil empires. That's the thing about it. It's really that we need to, take care of our neighbors and sourcing things from our community is one way to do it. But the interesting thing is it a local food, as we were talking today, if someone in the desert where I live is growing food with water that comes in a canal from 360 miles away, or is pumped from the groundwater that was set down 10,000 years ago. That's not really using local resources to their best advantage to grow local food. You could also say, is it really local food if the same arugula variety or romaine lettuce variety is grown coast to coast? You're kind of like a franchise for that romaine lettuce. There may be a lettuce that's part of the traditions here that might be a better choice for what you try to sell. And I've been involved with the revival of Buckeye chickens, a chicken breed that has a long history here and has been revived in a wonderful way. And you can eat it in the restaurants in the Cuyahoga River watershed. And a number of producers have done really well with that because it doesn't taste like Tyson chicken. It has a better story than Tyson chicken. It helps your neighbors more than working for Tyson chicken. So all of those things matter to each of you in a different way. Is it that you want to see money stay in your community? Do you want to see stories stay in your community? Do you want to have special taste here that when relatives come in, you can share those with? And then finally, besides celebrating those stories and terroir, the taste of place, there's ways of rebuilding cropping systems, and that's what this lower picture is about in what we call nurse plant guilds in the desert, where with climate change, some of our plants now really need more shade than they did in the past. I grow my romaine lettuce under mesquite trees like that tree in the picture, and I learned how to do that by watching where cacti start their lives. They don't start in the open in the desert with high radiation, high temperatures. All desert life begins under these nurse trees. And so now our agricultural systems there, even in my orchard, is having an overstory of shady canopies that we grow most of our vegetables and root crops underneath because we're already hitting 117, 118 degree temperatures down where I live. That's why I've lost half my brain cells and turned microphones into heavy metal music. So anyway, the point is that there's a lot of people working on these kinds of things, and I want to just acknowledge some of the publications that I've edited with literally dozens of people like you people in this room that have contributed to them. So I'm a compiler, but the ideas are coming from the communities. And if you want to look at how some of these things have worked in other regions, this is just a laundry list of where you can find some of those things. But the most important thing to think about is how you can build an economy. It doesn't matter which fruit you use, as much as you're looking at the whole system here. How you can have an economy that really reinforces the health and well-being of you and your neighbors rather than detracting from it or damaging your health. And there's some lovely examples. Our first trial run with this was in the Pacific Northwest and southwestern Canada, and what people up there have called for 20 years now Salmon Nation, that they feel united across the Canada-US border. We know those Canadians speak funny. They say things like a boot, but they're really nice people. They're not that different from us. And so the people in the Pacific Northwestern United States and Canada have joined forces to renew their food traditions in a very, very interesting way. And we found out once we brought together farmers and food historians, and really almost the same way your food thing brings together your scholars from so many departments here on campus, that we could identify foods that were uniquely found in that region, and then we realized that about a third of them were at risk of blinking out, that there were no markets that were, or grocery stores or restaurants that were even using them anymore. And so we asked chefs and farmers to evaluate them, and then we took the best ones and we boarded them on something called the Slow Food Arc of Taste, which is an international award or honorific listing of foods of each region of the world that are unique to particular landscapes. And now there's an effort among Slow Food USA members to add 20,000 foods from North America to this list. And many of the local slow food chapters are helping do that. So let's just see how they did it in the Pacific Northwest. First, it was just pure documentation, going through old agricultural handbooks and newspapers and advertisements from orchards and gardens and restaurant menus, and seeing some of the foods that were once popular in the region. And some of them are really remarkable, like the Marshall strawberry that up through the 1940s was a major strawberry grown in the Northwest, the major strawberry grown on the Pacific coast of the US, but largely by Japanese farmers. And when the Japanese relocation camps, or whatever you want to call it, internment camps occurred during World War II, that industry collapsed, and after that, other strawberries came in, and this whole connection between people, place, and strawberry got disrupted. And that strawberry survived on just one island near Seattle, and then people brought it back, and now it's in dozens of markets in the Northwest. So this is an example of doing these regional inventories and then coming out the other end and saying, which ones can really help farmers today? And so then we went through all the wild foods, and the Pacific Northwest just has an abundance of wild foods that First Nations or Native American people still know about and use. And every old grandmother on any of the Indian reservations there has probably made jellies or jams or sauces out of a half dozen of these different things. And they're absolutely delicious and in no way second-class foods. And then we turn to what I call the forgotten fruits that are in abandoned orchards. There were garlics that people literally found in gardens that had been, or orchards that hadn't been cultivated or managed for 50 years. And people went back, and in the irrigation ditches, there were these garlics growing that are now the major garlics that we use in the United States, in Chilean red and 4 or 5 other ones that I won't name now. But we found that a lot of these things are still out in the landscape. And we took this map, and here I'm going to switch to Appalachia. And where do you see the darkest, most dense cluster of dots on that map of the U.S. from 1925? It's really right in your area, from southern Ohio down through West Virginia and Virginia, North Carolina, and Tennessee was where the highest density of apple orchards were in the entire country. And just as a footnote here, Ohio can claim Johnny Appleseed, but there were thousands of Johnny Appleseeds that were planting fruits in these states, and then one of those fruit trees would cross with another, and there would be a seedling apple that would come up, what we call a pippin, and people would evaluate those, and they might name them for their grandmother or their neighbor. And so out of that area from Ohio down to Georgia and Appalachia, there are more apple varieties, named apple varieties, than in the rest of the country combined. And the same is true as corn, and the same is true with beans. But we have the remnants of the old trees still around in these orchards. So this friend of mine, Jim Vedito, who now teaches at Western North Carolina State in the anthropology department, but started this work when he was at Appalachian State in Boone, went around to all those historic orchards, found where they were, and then talked to people, and there were over 800 apples that he recorded in a matter of a year and a half, just from central and southern Appalachia. Nothing here done I mean, in this area or West Virginia of the same intensity. And I was talking to Paul today at lunch, and this is a project ripe for students to do. Go through old surveying records, find out where the old orchards are, ask for permission to see if they're still back in the woods, and then find them. And then that's what one of my students did in 4 states in the stinking hot desert, the Southwest. And he found that 50% of the trees in abandoned orchards are not in science, not in gene banks, and not described by science in our present day listings. And so this young friend of mine, Ferael Routes, who did his master's and PhD with me on apples, started out when he was 14 finding all these abandoned orchards in his county, and did his bachelor's thesis on that. For his master's, he did it in 4 states, and then for his PhD, he did the genetics on them at the National Seed Storage Lab in Colorado, and found out that most of the apples out in those orchards are undescribed and of value to apple breeders and apple eaters. And within 2 weeks of his master's thesis being published, it ended up on the New York Times editorial page saying, look at all these living riches at our doorstep that we've neglected and aren't even using. How can we bring this back into our economy and into our culture? So this is just the passion of one student going out into the landscape and looking for forgotten fruits. So if there's a place where you could have a viable economy based on the fruits and fish and vegetables and fungi of a region that are unique to this region, it's where you are living. You are in such a rich place, and you may not realize that this is this incredible crossroads of biological and cultural diversity, immigrant people from many different continents, many different countries, bringing their things, and the Cherokee people and other people in Appalachia also not losing what they had had for centuries and what they had shared with other cultures. And that more of that stuff is extant in this area, remaining in the landscape, than nearly any other part of North America. And that's because of the topography here. You can't bulldoze down the Appalachians. You can take the mountaintops off maybe, and you shouldn't, but you can't bulldoze it away like we have in the prairie and plain states to the same extent. So because of the topography and the cultural continuity here, you really have the kind of what I'd say biocultural wealth that no other region in the country does. And so the question I have for any of you who are going to court within the next month and have to do community service instead of being thrown into jail, like I've had to do a couple times, is how can we begin to survey these fruits and see which ones can help humans and our need for food and shelter in a way that can revitalize the local economies here, so that you don't continue to be one of the poorest counties and poorest parts of Ohio, but that you take the biocultural wealth here and put it into what people are now calling a restoration economy, making jobs by healing the land and healing the wounds between neighbors. And that really takes going beyond the heritage foods that I've talked about. I get hung up on the fruits and nuts because most of my friends are fruits and nuts or something like that. But the whole point is that the important thing is the big picture of thinking about a viable, sustainable agriculture and a viable, sustainable economy. And we're doing some experiments in our town. I too live in a county that's in the lower rungs of food security and wages, wage levels. 75% of the people who live in my county are below the poverty level. And we're trying this idea of a restoration economy. We have 5 orchards and about 14 vineyards within our county that are pooling fruit that then we're putting into fruit syrups, low sugar fruit syrups that are called shrubs, that are herb infused, mixed with vinegar, that both bartenders like to do in mixed drinks, but more importantly, they can be used for sugarless drinks for children who are vulnerable to diabetes and obesity and things like that. And so we're doing sugar-free fruit beverages that draw upon these heritage fruits of our region. I grow about 150 varieties of fruits in our own orchard. And this is something that you cannot even imagine what those words are on that. This isn't a vision test, you know. Only the people in the first row might avoid having to go out and get glasses or magnifying scopes or something. But this is our trial after 40 years with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 I put on here. Of 6 foods that we tried to domesticate from the wild fruits of our region. And they've all not only made it back onto the table, but back into farming systems, so that some of these things like pawpaw that were once only in the wild are now cultivated again. Well, I should footnote that. It could be that Native American people selected pawpaws, and that's part of the reason we have the great diversity of pawpaws here. But with things like mesquite trees and Oregon pipe cactus and wild chilies, we think they were primarily wild foods for people, but now we brought them into cultivation, and we have 40 and 100 acre plantations of mesquite trees that are now harvested both for food and firewood. And the wild chilies that I ate to become the wild chili champion of Arizona or the universe or whatever you want to say, now go for $60 a pound and are one of the highest priced commodities in Arizona, beaten only by medical marijuana on the per pound value. Well, how do we fund these startups? I was talking to the Shagbark Seed and Mill people about this. It's not easy rebuilding that infrastructure that we lost 50 years ago, the flour mills and the canning factories and the slaughterhouses. Nearly every part of the Midwest had at least one slaughterhouse per county 50 years ago, one grinding mill. You have one right on the river here that the building's still there and it says mill, you know, on it. But how do we get those things back in their community without having the people who have a passion about this going broke? I promise I will not become a heavy metal band anymore during this talk. But anyway, what I'm saying is that there are all kinds of new ways of doing community funding and crowdfunding and alternative financing for these things, so you don't owe your life to a bank in New York City anymore and are vulnerable to all these collapses and stock market downturns. And this is a good example. This is the Bauman family, a grandmother and granddaughter from the Amish and Mennonite reaches of Kansas that in Louisville, Kentucky, last November, won the slow money crowdfunding award of the people who came to a 3-day conference. And this family went home with a $60,000 no interest loan to help them build a place where they can process organic GMO-free corn for their free-range chickens. And to see the tears in the eyes of this granddaughter and grandmother who just said, we want to do this for our community, it's not just for ourselves, was so moving that they got a standing ovation from everyone at this wonderful slow money meeting of about 800 people who met in Louisville last year. And I have to say, Louisville's taking pride in its local product. what do they call it? The new Bourbonism. That's the new slogan for Louisville, which I thought was, you know, as I get older and older, I'm less into local foods and more into local beverages, I guess. So I liked what they were doing there. So the other thing that we can do is remember that some of these wild fruits are on public lands, so that we can't just deplete the populations there. We need to work with people who know how to sustainably harvest them. We need to give incentives to private landowners to taking care of them. And I think this is a neglected part of the conservation debate in our country. How do we best use private lands to increase diversity and maintain it in our food system? And this is a picture of Aldo Leopold, who was one of the first guys who really thought about that. He helped with the Wilderness Act and national parks and national forests. And then about halfway through his career, he flipped and said, the most important thing I can be doing as a conservationist is help private landowners become better stewards and make a living off what they have kept in their communities. Now, what did I do with that? Go away. Can I do, oh no. Let me think here. If I do the X, there we go. So this is an example of what you stick, if you stick with this idea that healing the land and healing differences between neighbors can heal our local economies and get us out of poverty. And this is an example from the Driftless area in Wisconsin, a place called Coon Valley, where in the 1930s or early 1940s, Aldo Leopold and a bunch of academics from University of Wisconsin-Madison would drive out more than an hour each morning and go to a little town and have breakfast with the farmers and livestock producers there and say, what does the land need? What does your community need? And they would just listen. And I think this is one of the most important things I've learned from this work, that farmers and ranchers have great ideas about what to do, but a lot of times we're not listening to what they're saying. And so probably the greatest skill that you can learn from going through college is how to listen to people who have ideas different than your own and absorb those. And the remarkable thing was, after these listening sessions, they restored about 40,000 acres of croplands and down-cut gullies, and started to put in erosion control features. And then 20 years later, one of the greatest food co-ops in the entire country, Crop, started on those same lands because people already had a, an experience of working together across land ownership boundaries, public lands and private lands together, neighbors helping each other. And they formed Crop first as a vegetable co-op, and now it's a little company called Organic Valley that sells $100 million of value-added dairy and vegetable products to the American public every year. And I met one of the old-timers who was in that first bunch of farmers that decided to go into the co-op rather than going it alone, and saying, I'll go organic and improve my land through organic methods rather than just using chemical fertilizers. I said, what was that like to be in the first wave of something that's now so important to the American food system? And he said, well, keep in mind it was the 1950s and 60s, and when I told my brother-in-law and my brother that I was going to join a co-op, they thought I was becoming a communist. And then when I got my first $1 million royalty check from becoming a communist dairy farmer, they all wanted to become communists too. But the point is, this has really worked. This is a collaborative economy, and it's paid off not only in the Coon Valley, but it's spread to something like 16 different states. In Patagonia, Arizona, where I live, we're doing this restoration economy. In just the last 2.5 years, we've created a hybrid nonprofit, for-profit organization to restore the land, a nonprofit to help high school students and young adults who haven't been to college to get money to go to college by working to restore the land. And 17 new jobs in a 1,250-acre wildlife corridor just in a short period of time, and it's just going great guns. The growth curve for our activities is sort of dragging us along. And again, 10 high school students whose parents have never gone to college, but they want to go to college, are working for us every summer as part of something we call the Earth Care Youth Corps. And they work on farms and ranches mentored by older farmers and ranchers that somehow have never seen mohawk haircuts and purple hair and nose rings and tattoos. But they take these kids and they work with them, and they all end up buddies. And it's a pretty remarkable thing for the young women and men that are part of this. And so we're doing some novel designations to keep this work doing in our little city where I teach part-time, Tucson. We're getting it designated the first city of gastronomy in North America from UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Scientific, and something or other organization. What's the third thing in UNESCO? Education, Scientific, Cultural organization. And with our town, we're doing a pollinator corridor between Mexico and the United States, saying that the migratory animals like butterflies and hummingbirds are following the same path that people have migrated into the U.S. with for thousands of years. And we're trying to attract tourists and interns, student interns, and other people who want to take sabbaticals with us to look at what we're doing in this landscape. Now, that's in Arizona, but what's happening all around you is going to be one of the biggest land use changes within the next generation, within the next 10 years, that's ever happened in American history. Real estate economists now think that as the baby boomers, like me, get old and dry up and get composted in the fields below our houses, that between 200 and 400 million acres of land, arable land, ranch land, and farmland, going to change hands within the next decade and a half. And that means that we have to match aspiring farmers with old-timers who have land but no descendants, or at least a fifth to a fourth of that land is going to go to real estate development. I have nothing against real estate developers and people who build houses, but if one of our most diminishing resources is arable land that doesn't need the soil rebuilt and the water piped in from 360 miles away, if that's becoming a scarce resource, why don't we make sure that our best farmland stays farmland? And so we're really at a turning point in American history. We either take advantage of these fruits that we've been given and the land that's one of the richest resources that the American people have ever had, and do something good with it, or it will be squandered within the next generation. The costs of not doing the right thing are enormous. We're going to accept the inevitability of the loss of food diversity, and I think we're going to see livable wages decline rather than flourish. We're going to see that our rivers and forests are contaminated or dominated by genetically engineered fish and tree crops. We're going to have a subsidized economy here in counties like this that are below the poverty level because we haven't pulled ourselves up by the bootstraps, to use the language from the Johnson and Kennedy era. And we fatally accept that more and more people around us will dwell in poverty and suffer either from hunger or obesity, which are both forms of malnutrition. And so the most vulnerable people to climate change are the poor people in any landscape. And we either decide that slowing down climate change is not just a technical issue, but it's a human issue and do something about it, or we all lose out. So it's up to us to pass on healthy land and diverse fruits on to future generations of foragers, orchard keepers, chefs, and farmers of all cultures. And I just want to end up with one of my neighbors, Haley Thomas, that at age 10 cooked for the Obamas in the White House. She was already that good of a cook. And we've started one of these edible magazines. And at age 14, she has a bi-monthly column about healthy foods in that magazine and is lecturing people twice her age on healthy eating. And I just think she's the kind of person that we need as a poster child in every community because she is our future. So I want to end with that and thank you all. And I just hope this motivates you not to think about moving to the stinking hot desert or to Salmon Nation, but doing what you can to make the place in which you're seated right now more vibrant, diverse, and hopeful. Thank you very much. Questions, and like I said at the Pawpaw Festival, I only take yes and no questions and multi-choice questions. Well, that scared you away. No, are there any questions? You're afraid that I might make the microphone squeak again, right? No, back here. Why did I want to get into it? Because I grew up in Gary, Indiana, and saw grinding poverty all around me. And at the same time, I saw this incredible richness of plants and animals that happened to be along the shores of Lake Michigan. And I thought, you know, why do we have this disconnect between conserving nature, taking care of nature, and taking care of ourselves? Is there any way that we can put the wealth of our natural resources to better use to help people heal socially and physically? And so, like I said, I was a high school dropout, and I spent all my time playing hooky out in the Indiana dunes on the Lake Michigan shoreline, and Roberta knows what I'm talking about. We all played hooky, and that's where we learned what a great place we lived in there. And I want to say that as someone who has spent half my life working for conservation organizations talking about conserving biodiversity, I don't think that idea will ever catch hold with most of America unless we say, how can that really work for poverty alleviation and health, enhancing the health, and keeping people from the horrible nutrition-related diseases that are crippling a lot of our kids and elders now. So because I love our kids and I love our elders, I think that's what motivates me. So thank you for that question. Yeah?
I didn't get a chance to read all those unusual fruits on that slide.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you've considered some way of having samples like a fruit of the month or some way to disperse these tastes to the general public.
That's a great idea. And again, Chris from the Pawpaw Festival and Andrew Moore that's just written this wonderful book on pawpaws, and he was at the festival. We talked about doing tastings, not just of pawpaws, but all these other incredible fruits that you have here in the forest and the floodplain. So stay tuned. I think what you're talking about is really important, and that's kind of the idea behind this Arc of Taste, that different slow food communities, rather than tasting wine and cheese, are actually tasting a lot of these wild foods and seeing what they can do with them in new ways. So I think your question's great. Thank you. Yeah?
A lot of your books are built around a journey, and I wondered what your next journey is going to be. If you could let us into that.
My next journey. So I don't stay put very well, like my friend Scott Sanders wrote about in Bloomington, Indiana. I kind of am a wayward kind of character. And I don't know if I'll be writing narrative nonfiction anymore. I'm trying to, because I've had some concussions, I'm writing tiny little poems and tiny little parables. But a lot of it has to do with appreciating what's right in front of us. So again, I'm kind of recovering from concussions and kind of abstained from writing temporarily while I was getting my head unrattled. And so I don't know what's going to happen next, but you'll be the first to know. Good. Good. Thank you.
I'm curious, you talked about how we could take the best strains of native forgotten foods and market them in new ways. I'm curious if there's any way for these local communities to partner with scientists and use genetic engineering.
Yeah, the question's about how we can, is it possible to partner with scientists and engineers to do this? Nearly every one of these foods has its own peculiar issues with harvesting and cleaning and threshing. And so the people that just astonish me are the guys that I've worked with saying, like, why are you doing that by hand? Let me do this little vine harvester where it spits all the vines out into your compost pit and puts the fruit into another pile. And so engineers have a key role in doing, what we call appropriate technologies at the right scale to make these things work. And I'm doing a crowdfunding campaign to use our kitchen that we have in our orchard to process 150 different kinds of fruits. Well, there's no single way that you can get a peeler that works for all of them, or a masher, or a slasher, or a musher. And so each of those fruits is going to need something different, and they have different storage qualities and all of that. So rather than saying this is all at the grassroots level, I think universities like this that are in service to their surrounding communities have a huge role in making this work. They can put students in doing special projects in classes or in independent studies on some of these issues and help entrepreneurs who are trying to rebuild the infrastructure of the food system here. Back there.
How does one go about finding some of these obscure, forgotten plant varieties?
Well, everything I do is kind of obscure, so I go from one dark closet to the next or something. But I mean, literally, one of the things that we do is going back to old survey records, and oftentimes they used big trees as boundary markers when they were doing the first surveys through a Midwestern state. And they'll say, go 35 paces from the highway, and there's a Rhode Island greening fruit tree. And we've literally gone back to some of these places and paced off 18 feet and found in the middle of all kinds of other shrubs and bushes an old fruit tree. And so it's taking hints from old county fair records and land surveys and if there's any menus in the Historic Society from community events, what people were eating a century ago, and then using those as cues, and it puts you on a road like you're a detective, like you're Ohio Jones or something like that, but you're looking for fruits rather than gold. Is there an Ohio Jones? Yeah.
Gary, if I can speak to that, I'm Mary Nally, Director of Community Food Initiatives, and we do host wild edible walks seasonally, and there are also others in our community, certified herbalists that take people out on wild medicinal walks as well.
Yeah.
So we're out there
Yeah.
for
Yeah. Yeah, CFI is probably your best gateway into these activities because a lot of wonderful people have been involved with it over its history that know this area well. One more question, and then we'll retreat.
You co-authored a book on pollinators in 1996.
Mm-hmm. Honey, I Forgot the Pollinators was the name of the book, I think. No, maybe not. That's not right. Oh, that's right. That's right.
So that was off the concern about pollinators was pretty much off the popular culture awareness.
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit about this pollinator corridor that you're working on? Because I think that's really the model.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So a year and a half ago, I started a group with more farmers and scientists on the board, but there are scientists and artists and writers. And it's called Make Way for Monarchs. And our whole idea is restoring the nectar corridors, the plant corridors that migratory hummingbirds and butterflies and bats and pollinators that have an impact on our food system and our wildlands need. And so in our area with this Earth Care Youth Corps, we're restoring gullies, healing the soil erosion, and putting in check dams and other things to keep the soil in place, and then planting alongside those pollinator attracting plants that are rich in nectar. And so that's what we're doing in our little town of Patagonia. And like I said, 2 years ago at spring equinox, we put up this sign calling our little town the pollinator capital of the universe or something like that, pollinator capital of the United States. And since we put up that sign, you'd be surprised how many pollinators have shown up. They're really good readers. Yeah. So we've really had fun with this, and we think it is a model for other communities. Just take something that's unique in your area and have fun with it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary.